C to the P and K to the P. Thank you. For all of you that are watching at home, which is 99% of us, I just know that when you're seeing me now, this is really 2 minutes in the past. And so everything that you comment for sound stuff, we're doing our best. And what you should do is take a minute and send a text message to Doug Sadler or Tim Klein, the younger one, and say thank you, because they are trying as the best they can to tweak knobs and move levers and sliders and get all of things kind of adjusted so that we can kind of communicate together, even though there is a bit of a lag. And the lag is somewhat intentional so that you don't have to deal with weird buffering and pauses, that if we don't have the latency in there, then there'd be some sections where you wouldn't be able to see it because YouTube can't process it fast enough. I have a few housekeeping things that I'm going to kind of walk through, but before I get to that, because of the lag, I have a question for all of you, and what I would like you to do is comment on the stream. I'm watching the stream too to kind of see some things. Comment, today we're looking in Luke chapter 7 towards the middle, the second story in Luke 7, where Jesus interacts with a group of people that are on their way in a funeral procession. And what I want you to do is comment in here, what are the things that you remember about the funerals you've been to? So what is a funeral like? What are the people like? What happens? What goes on? All of those odds and ends, all of the sort of description stuff, so that we can see. What I want to do is kind of compare and contrast how we experience death and grieving and a funeral in that aspect versus how they did in Near Eastern countries in the first century. So do that, take a minute, type those things in, because by the time I get to the place where I'm going to need that information, you should have heard this. So do it now, otherwise we won't have enough info to actually have a conversation. As far as a few things that are kind of housekeeping things is make sure that you get connected. Make sure that you, if you're watching on YouTube right now, hit the subscribe little button and the bell in there to get the notifications so that you know whenever we're on live. Make sure that you go to Facebook and you like and share and subscribe and all that sort of stuff, because throughout the week we're trying to give you as much content as we can between the staff and those of us around to give you some moments of worship kind of over the lunch hour, and to just give you whatever we can to keep you engaged and to break down the mundaneness of maybe the homicidal mania that is happening within the children of your household. If it's anything like mine, they only stay cooped together for so long before they don't like each other anymore. And of course, if you have any questions, any ways that you're not really getting connected, make sure that you email the office. Email Lisa at the office. It's office@firstreformedsfsd.com. And make sure that you get in on the list so that you can be included in all of the things that go out. The next thing is if you are having trouble with any of the sound stuff, feel free to comment, and just know that as we go through this stuff, we're doing it and changing it as we see it, but it's still going to take a couple of minutes for it to adjust on your end. So give it a few minutes after you comment. And then the third thing is something that is, it seems odd for us, but isn't. So we don't have deacons in here to pass around offering plates, nor is there really anybody in here that would take an offering, because I think all of us in here probably do an ACH anyway. But now is a good time that if you are as a family, go online and go to the online giving tab, and you can select specific amounts. If you have questions about that, you can ask Lisa in the office. If you want somebody to send you a self-addressed envelope, we can do that. If you just want to stop by in the middle of the week and drop off some offering, you can do that. And the reason that I segue into that is, in order to help things flow better for y'all at home, I made a significant purchase for the church that hopefully you saw. I think it's over here, maybe. Is it over here? There should be some slides that aren't really here, that are here. And so there's a fancy piece of equipment in the back that switches between videos and sounds and transitions and all of that, so that we can actually see the words that are going on the screen and not have to squint and see them all fuzzy. But if you're willing to contribute to that, please let Lisa know in the office, and we'll put that towards the fund, because it was kind of pricey, but it's something that I think with 143 people watching right now, times however many people are in your group, it's worth it to keep us all on the same page. I'm going to pray, and then I'm going to jump in and start reading from Luke chapter 7. So if you're at home, feel free to grab your Bible and open it up, or continue to add your comments. I see a few of them coming through now. But I invite you to pray with me wherever you're at, and now's a good time to hit pause on all the rest of the craziness of life and tell your kids to actually sit down or go in the other room, or hit pause on the stream so that you can come back and knit us together as one family. That through the oddity of technology that we can come together, that through YouTube we can see each other, or you can at least see us, and we can see your comments, that we can truly, even though separated and quarantined, that we can be a group, a body, a church. I pray that in that midst you would speak, that you would help us to find some attention and focus, that we would hear your words as plain as Luke wrote them, but we would understand them. In the book of Luke is chapter 7 starts out, and we find that Jesus leaves, or he's in Capernaum, which is in the northern area of Galilee, around the Sea of Galilee, sometimes called the Sea of Tiberias, which seems like a nice place, but is also somewhat low to the ground. So we know the Dead Sea is really, really low below sea level, but the Sea of Tiberias, the Sea of Galilee, is also below sea level by like 200 to 500 feet below sea level. So he's still down there, and that'll make sense when we get to the next portion of this. But within that area, he has an interaction with a group of Jews that come to ask him to help out a Roman centurion, and he's amazed by the centurion's faith. And as they move through, we see that he heals a young man that is within the centurion's household. And now we see, and I'm going to start at verse 11. Soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went with him. The thing that is of note is soon afterwards is the English translation, but the Greek translation there is really more of a and right away, and the following day, and the next day. He went to this place called Nain. So he goes from Capernaum, which is in the north, but very, very low as far as the actual elevation, to Nain, which is further south in Israel, right along the border. Yeah, there should be a picture up here coming up, where you can see Nain is in the middle between Nazareth and Samaria, where the Jews and the Gentiles and all the people don't really get along, and then further down is Jerusalem. The thing to note here is this area of Nain is actually, 700 feet above sea level. So as he walks, we find out that within a day to 2 days, he has traveled from 500 to 700 feet below sea level to 500 to 700 feet above sea level, all mainly walking by foot on dirt paths and goat paths and areas to get to this place called Nain, which sits at the base of a place called Mount Moriah. And the thing of note here is this is the area in which the majority of the book of Judges takes place, and a lot of the book of Kings with Elijah and Elisha. This area is right about the area where Gideon takes his few men and defeats the Midianites. And if you follow the area from the rivers all the way over to the sea coast, that is where Mount Carmel is, where Elijah defeats the prophets of Baal and the cloud comes. And so this whole area is an area that is saturated with prophetic lineage, which we'll see as we move further in. The thing to note here, too, is he is walking with a large crowd. The Greek here is literally much crowd is following Jesus. So as Jesus walks from Capernaum towards Nain, we don't know why he walks there. He just happens to make his way there. As he walks there, a lot of people are with him. So not just the crowd of disciples, but a larger crowd of people continue to make their way with him to see the miracles he's going to do. Verse 12, as he approached the town gate, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother, who was a widow, and a large crowd from the town was with her. Now, what we know is to be a widow in that sort of context, especially in the first century, was not necessarily a good thing. There was no Social Security, there was no Medicare and Medicaid, there was nothing that was as far as government assistance other than what we find in portions of the Old Testament is the gleaners, those that would come through, like in the book of Ruth, with Ruth and Boaz, where you could go through and clear out a field after it had been done. There's no formal way for people to take care of people by giving them funds or any sort of like multi-trillion-dollar spending package like we have now. They had just the people around them. And so her, having her husband die, and the only child she has is now died, they are making their way through the city streets of Nain, which is relatively small. And I will note here that it tries to bring two groups together, of a large crowd with Jesus, much crowd, and then when it gets to the group in Nain, it says large crowd again, but the reality is it just says crowd. So not as big as the one with Jesus, but we see them come together. And the thing here is, so a few things from the stream as far as those that are watching along of what funerals are like. I have sad but joyful. I find funerals will bring people that we haven't seen for a while, so connections. Typical funeral food, which is almost always some sort of potato salad, chips, and ham buns, I think, is the usual. The music, their favorite songs, remembering their life, a somber mood and a gathering of people, time to reflect about the person's life and a eulogy moment. You begin to see how a whole life is compacted into just a few paragraphs that you hand out at the door. Jane, that's really good. When you get into the first century context of Near Eastern people, mourning was different than how we do it. So typically when we mourn, when we come to a funeral, it's quiet and we sit. And we read the life story of the person and the people involved. And even when we're around with family, it's fairly quiet and fairly somber. Within the first century context, and I forgive me if this is really loud on the stream, but this is how I was explained by my Hebrew professor, the word wail or woe within the Hebrew context. So a funeral is happening and you would hear people go, repeatedly. If you have hearing aids, I apologize. You can adjust those and I won't yell any further. Repeatedly, that it was loud. And the common theme throughout this is they would tear their clothes, especially, I'm not going to tear my shirt because it's too fancy. They would tear their shirt so that it would expose their hearts, because there's something of their heart that has now been taken away from them. And they show it to the people to show that they are vulnerable now. And so people, as they walk, are crying out. They would even pay people to be professional mourners, typically like we do with people that sing songs in our funerals or play music. So they would actually chant and sing the Psalms of Lament as they would come through, and they would cry out to God to restore them. They would ask God to bring down His mercy upon them. What wasn't happening was a whole lot of time to talk about the person. There was some of that, but very little in the procession as it moved through. And some things that I read is some Near Eastern countries would actually walk 7 steps and then wail and walk 7 steps and wail, or some of them shorten that to just 7 stops until they got out to the actual funeral area. But it was loud, and it cried out continually, not to say, God, what am I going to do? But God, I pray that you would be glorified in this. I don't understand it. So it's continually a focus heavenward to say, God, I need you. I need something more than just why. As we move through, we'll actually see how this kind of comes to bear. Verse 13, and the Lord saw her. Now keep in mind, Jesus is walking along with a herd of people behind him. A woman is walking along towards the gate of the city with a herd of people behind her, and the body that is being brought out, and Jesus stops and sees her. Now, this could be a whole sermon on its own of being seen by Jesus, that in your anguish and grief, he sees her. That means whatever he was doing, this was most important. And he had compassion for her. Now, the thing that we don't sort of translate well in the word compassion is the word compassion means, and his bowels were moved. There's only a few of us in here, but I'm trying not to make that a joke. That it's not like he suddenly got a little bit of IBS or irritable bowel or he had to find a bathroom, but literally, and we know this neurochemically, that there's a vast majority of the neurotransmitters found in your bowels, that throughout your small intestine, your colon, there's little receptors that trigger things that go up the nerve in your spine to your brain that help you regulate your emotions. This is one of those things where you get a gut feeling about something. Well, I just had a bad feeling about it in my gut. This is it. Jesus, inside, feels compassion. And so he goes to the woman, literally, so his group of people stop. He walks towards her group of people. They stop. And he says, do not weep. That's what you do. That's what they were told to do. They had rules on how they mourned. They mourned X amount of days, 7 days in this way, 30 days in this way, X amount of days if it was a son, X amount of days if it was a parent. He walks up to her and says, don't. Now, here's the part that really got me this morning while I was working out in my basement. This is such a strong foreshadow of, in the midst of the wailing and the tears and the crying out, he says, don't cry. We find in the book of Revelation that on that day, he will literally wipe away every tear. And he begins that here in person. And so they come up. Jesus walks up to it says here, then they came up and he touched the bier. This is literally like a board. They had very specific ways that we find with Jesus' burial in which they actually prepare the body. In some of the readings I had, there was always 2 people. They always treated it with respect. They turned one side, the other side. They wrapped certain ways. And then they carried, most of the time, not in a coffin like we have, but literally on a plank. So the body is wrapped up, carried on a plank, and Jesus is walking towards it. And the thing to remember is there is still kosher and cleanliness rules. Now, if Jesus walks towards this person that is dead, if he interacts with the people, typically the family and a few people carrying it were the only ones that would be close enough to the body to actually be considered unclean. Hence, there are still rules of 7 days you will mourn because you're unclean, and then X amount of days after that if you go back to the tomb to see the body again. So within this, we see the rules are there for a purpose that are highlighted throughout the Levitical laws. Jesus just walks up and avoids all of those rules. So he has this much crowd of people following him going, wait, don't do that, because then I can't follow close to you, kind of like how we're all in social distancing 6 feet away. It's funny how we actually, even Craig and Crystal are sitting 6 feet away by them, and they lay by each other in bed. That there is this distancing that happens. If he interacts with that body, everything else he touches is unclean. So he is literally supposed to be quarantined and put away. But he goes up and he touches the body, and those who were carrying it stood still. And he said to them, "Young man, I say to you, get up, arise." So the dead man, just to reinforce in case you didn't understand, the dead man sat up and began to speak. Now, when I think through this in my own head, if the person is dead and suddenly something happens and he is brought back to life, the first thing you go is, what the heck just happened? He talks. And now he's wrapped up, kind of like we would think of a mummy, wrapped up in cloths, and he asks what's going on. And what isn't conveyed here is it says, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. The connotation is Jesus took the man, which we must kind of tweak our brain here of he's a young man and he's not married, so he must be in that after 13 bar mitzvah age, not quite old enough to have enough money to support his family and support a wife that he can pay a dowry for. So he's probably in his teens to 20s, and Jesus walks up and picks him up and carries him over to his mother and hands him back. Verse 16, fear seized all of them. The word here is awe. So we saw in the first part of chapter 7, Jesus is amazed. Wonder is the background word there. The root word is wonder. And the only other time that he's amazed is when the people of Nazareth are not willing to see his miracles. And he's amazed by their unbelief, and then he's amazed by the belief of the centurion. And now the word here that Luke gives us is fear and awe seized them. And the best way to explain this is, when I was in college, I read the book Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis. And at the very beginning, he says there's awe and fear in one sense, and then there's awe and fear in a sense called numinous fear or numinous awe, that it's one is there's a tiger in the room and you're scared. And then he moves on to say the other fear, the other awe is, I tell you, there is a spirit in the room with you, but it's a benevolent spirit. There's something that strikes you as amazement, as fear, as scared, but also not afraid. This is, back to the Hebrew adage, of the fear of the Lord. They see Jesus, the things that he has done, and they begin to glorify God, saying, a great prophet has appeared among us. This whole area is where the prophets went through. Elijah and Elisha. If you read through those stories of how many times, the one that comes to mind, Elisha saves the one lady's son and brings him back to life in this same area, this Jezreel Valley. So they are steeped in knowing this is the area of the prophets. Is this another prophet? And they reply, and God has come to help his people. This report about Jesus circulated through Judea, that means all the way to the south, beyond Samaria to Jerusalem, and all of the surrounding country. Now, if we break some of this stuff down to see how this really impacts us, is we have a story of Jesus and a herd of people coming, and a woman who has nothing left, and a herd of people coming with her, and these two crowds intersect each other, and they come at a crossroads, and we find a woman that is crying out to the Lord, crying out to God, crying out for somebody to save her, crying out in lament, crying out in pain, saying, God, why did you do this? But I know that you're sovereign. I know that you have a plan. That's the power of lament all the way through, is acknowledging your grief, but also saying, God, I know that you're gracious. I know that you're the one that holds all things together. And lo and behold, God shows up. She cries out, and God shows up. That gets me. And it's simple to just read over or to take for granted. And the part that we logically go is, well, you know, things aren't good for me, and I cry out to God, and, well, I don't really know God or see God, so he's probably not going to show up. Do you think that she had heard about Jesus at this point? She didn't send anybody to Jesus. Jesus is just beginning his ministry. Here is when word starts to spread out. And so when she cries out just like we would. And say, God, I need you. I need something of you. I don't understand. I know that you hold all things in your hands, but why are your hands so far away from me? And Jesus steps right into her pain. The other thing is we often mistake the fact that there was a crowd of people with her. She is a widow. She has no husband. He's died. She has a son who has no wife or family because he's not old enough, and he just died. She now has nothing. And a city, a town, a people come around her. Now, this town probably wasn't very large, maybe 30 households approximately, they guess. So when you look at that, you begin to see families come together to be there. That what we want to hear is, oh, God shows up and that's great. Yes. But before God ever shows up, before Jesus walks in, God is already at work bringing a people together to help a woman that has nothing. Now for us, kind of a good translation here is, if we're honest, if we really approach things, most of us have something that we're hurting with. Some of us don't. Some of us are doing very well, and God seems to be moving in a positive way. We're in the crowd with Jesus. We're the ones that have either experienced a miracle, we're the ones that are with him coming along, or we're maybe the crowd of people that are with the woman that things seem to be going well. But there are some of us in our midst, some of you watching right now, where life is not good. Life hurts. The bills, you don't know how you're going to pay for them because you can't work, because we can't be around people. And the letters keep coming, and the notifications through your online bill pay keep tinging and dinging and dinging, and you don't know how ends are going to meet. Your kids seem to fight over top of each other all the time. The stuff keeps compounding and compounding, and it hurts. Or maybe you have family members that are sick and you don't know what to do. You can't be around them. Maybe you yourself are not feeling well, or you have something that's wrong and nobody can come and visit you, and there you are alone in your room. That is the place where you have to swallow hard and remember that it is never, never, never okay to simply say nothing. That the thing that we do in our community, in our culture, is bad things happen and we gulp down real hard and we get through it. And their culture wails and cries to let everybody know things are not well. If that's you, if things are not going well, if you're hurting inside, you can't fit the pieces together, you don't know where to go next, you don't have someone to turn to, as cliche as it seems, cry out to the Lord. Literally. Ask him to help. Ask him to intervene on your behalf. Ask him to come into your life, into your family, to work with the doctors, to help you physically, emotionally, monetarily, spiritually. That if you ask, he shows up. But what you don't want to do is right now go online and find some weird quote to explain how awful life is and send it out to Facebook for the 80 billion people on the earth to look at. And the reality is all that does is screams out to nothingness. It's a way of making yourself feel better but not really ask for help, because we don't do that. Cry out and ask, and then don't just simply post things that are for anybody. Find people around you. This woman had a whole town that said, you have nothing and we have your back. Think about this. No one was there to carry her son's funeral. No one was there to carry the body. The community came together. Cry out to the Lord. Swallow hard that pride that you think you're not able to say anything. And then look to the people around you. We have had so many stories as a church where families are struggling and we help. where individuals don't know how the next day is going to happen and all of the stuff keeps piling up. And one of the leaders from the church comes alongside and says, I'm here. That if you really asked any one of the people around you, I need help. I need somebody to pick up the phone. I need something more than an artificial text message or something online. They will be there. Maybe it's social distance, drop off food at your front door. Maybe it's go shopping for you. Maybe it's a phone call. Maybe it's FaceTime. Maybe it's chatting. Anything. But the point of this story is that when you cry out, the Lord answers. Sometimes physically with his own presence, like in this case, and sometimes physically with our presence, his people. But you have to be willing to say something. Let's pray.